Welcome to the Voice of San Diego podcast in partnership with News Radio 600 Kogo. I am Scott Lewis, the CEO and editor-in-chief at Voice of San Diego. And coming up on the show, the city of San Diego is officially at legal war with the La Jolla separatists, why a ballot measure push a couple of years ago is actually related. The mayor's revised budget is still pretty ugly and still gets rid of the beach bonfire rings. We'll talk about that. And finally, the budget has also set up a nasty little standoff between the city and the county over a homeless shelter in the Midway area. They have stopped letting people into the tent, and the operator of it is furious. All that and more. Stay with us. Joined in the studio this week by Bella Ross, the social media producer and the only person joining me here today. She's also the star of a new profile in the Daily Aztec, the place she used to run.
Strong word. And it's not the Daily Aztec technically, it's the Professional Studies and Fine Arts School of SCSU, which is the catch-all school that happens to include journalism and also like dance and random things that aren't really related.
See, they're trying to get you to donate, right? They profile you like how good you are, but then you gotta donate.
I feel like maybe they should be, if that's the way this works, they should be profiling more of the PR grads because I may be a trailblazing social media journalist, but I am not Miss Moneybags yet. Okay, so
I get it. So or at least wait a few years, right?
Give it some time. They always email me on my birthday asking for money, which is crazy.
Whoa.
They're like, happy birthday, Bella.
So I have some news, or maybe it's just news to me, but we need to grapple with this. It's existentially interesting for our show. So yeah, outside the building today, our building that I have identified many, many times as being in Great or Little Italy. Outside of our building are these new, banners. I think they're new. Maybe they're not, but they say Cortez Hill on them, and therefore our building is being identified as being in Cortez Hill. Now across the street, remember at the Simone, there is a claim that they're part of Little Italy. It's like at Little Italy. So is Cortez Hill like claiming the spot, or have we always been part of Cortez Hill?
I think that's tricky because one, it's called Cortez Hill, and then we are not on a hill. We're at the base of the hill.
No
if anything.
Hill.
I drive over the hill most mornings.
Yeah,
and
it's a legit hill.
It's pretty distinct.
Yeah.
And this is not on that hill, but I usually do not park in the parking garage. So I'm walking around these blocks a lot, and I'm pretty sure there's a actual permanent sign across the street at the base of 101 Ash that says Cortez Hill.
Yeah, but that's on that side.
Sure, I guess maybe what is it, First Street?
I feel like we're in the middle of a territorial fight between Spain and Italy.
Yeah.
We've got the Cortez Conquistador. Is that who it's named after, by the way?
I don't know. Check. Do we feel like this is targeted?
I think that Cortez wants us to start identifying as Cortez Hill, and they're mad that we've been identifying as Greater Little Italy.
Well, I actually really like Cortez Hill. I think it's a weirdly residential part of downtown that is kind of slept on. You don't really go to Cortez Hill unless I went to a yoga studio there a couple days ago, but unless you live there. Yeah. And it's very charming.
It is charming.
I really like it, and maybe they need more to claim.
But it's I've identified with the Little Italians, and I don't know, you're Bella, that's your name. Don't you feel like a connection to the Little Italians?
Not really. I am part Italian. I think that maybe that's enough.
Me too.
For me, I don't need to be validated by.
So we're open to the Cortez encroachment, the colonization that's occurring.
This is so. You think that this is how La Jolla feels? To be in the cross section of independence and.
We'll have to evaluate our identity going forward. I'm gonna stick with Greater Little Italy this week. But I think that everybody should be talking about this. Everybody should be talking about this. Not enough people are talking about this, okay? and we need to deal with this. Where are we right now?
Should we write some letters?
Yeah. Petition. Let's go. Let's create our own little autonomous island here. Well, speaking of autonomy, the city of San Diego. So remember when the mayor was in here with us?
In the chair that I'm sitting in right now.
Yeah, and he was talking about La Jolla. I think he gave off the impression that he didn't really care that they were doing this, right? I think that's what Andrea said a couple of days ago. By the way, she's getting married this week. Yay, Andrea.
We're all going to rage this weekend for Andrea and Ulises and for love.
Love is in the air. But she said, like, I thought he didn't really care. And if you look back at what he said, look, if they're going to leave, if La Jolla is going to leave the city of San Diego, I'm not going to make it easy for them. I'm not going to give them services. They're not going to get our fire department. They're not going to get those things. But that's the opposite of saying you don't care. That's like, oh, you're going to leave? Like, you're going to feel it.
It's like petty, caring, but in like a petty way.
Exactly. So they clearly do care because the city has now authorized the city attorney to file suit against the local agency formation commission, which all of the listeners of this show now know well.
Yes, LAFCO.
LAFCO, we joked about it last week with LAFCO's executive officer, Keen Simons, at our live podcast. Thanks to everyone who came. Mm-hmm. And the city, the update there is the city is now suing LAFCO for accepting the 240 or so signatures that they, said were readily ascertainable who signed them. So the registrar of voters had gotten the signatures and said those don't conform. They don't match up to any voters on our list. And LAFCO said, au contraire, they just have these little errors. We're going to go ahead and determine that they were sufficient. The city is now suing them for that.
I have a couple of questions. Yeah. What's wrong with the signatures? This feels like a very subjective art.
So LAFCO says, look, a lot of them were just, they abbreviated the street name wrong, or remember there was that point in the city's letter where the city pointed out, like, the LAFCO people were like, oh, maybe they just got it wrong because of their cultural heritage. They don't know exactly how to write out addresses. Maybe they shortened names from like Chris, from Christopher, and the voter roll says Christopher, that sort of thing.
Right.
The city, though, said, like, a lot of these signatures weren't legible at all. Like, they were just, so how can you say that that's a legit ascertainable signature when it's not? And so they said, like, you don't have the right to, like, overrule the registrar of voters. And then as you heard last week with Keen Simon, he said, look, we didn't overrule. We contracted with them to do this analysis. Then we look at what they produce and decide whether it's valid or not.
Right. That just seems so interesting because the signature collection process is so inherently upsetting, tedious, like to be walking in like a Walmart parking lot and just like, scrawl your name onto something. Like, sure, maybe that's like not the most engaged way to participate in that process, but like that doesn't mean that you didn't do it.
Yeah.
You're just kind of trying to get away.
Yeah.
And so like I could totally imagine a situation where like I scroll something that's like totally illegible, but that doesn't mean that I didn't want to count. I took the time.
Yeah.
And so I can see how that's like very dicey.
Yeah. And so it also, I think, relates to a really interesting story. So readers and listeners of Voice San Diego remember a couple years ago, the City of San Diego's Library Foundation and the Parks Foundation. So the foundations that were set up to try to help parks and libraries, they wanted to raise a parcel tax. So now a parcel tax is different than a property tax. A parcel tax is like a flat fee on how big your property is. A property tax is a ratio of how much your property's assessed value is, right? So if it was going to be 2 cents per square foot. So if you had a 5,000 square foot, home lot, and this were to pass, you would have to pay $100 more per year. And so they wanted to put that on the ballot last go around They got 111,000 signatures. They only needed like 80,000. They turned them in. The registrar of voters came back and said, all of these are not valid. And they had the same complaint. They said, whoa, you threw out like somebody had the wrong zip code, or they shortened the name of the street, STRE instead of ST or whatever. And there were all these like really petty things that you threw out these signatures for. And they sued not only the registrar of voters, but they sued the city clerk, because then the city clerk was in the same position that LAFCO is in with La Jolla, where they were like contracting with the registrar of voters to do this analysis and then accepting the results, right? So the city in that case has been opposing a lawsuit saying they should accept these signatures and put it on the ballot in a way that would like raise taxes for the city and ostensibly like help the city with its parks and its libraries. Mm-hmm. They spent $1 million getting those signatures, by the way. And so that lawsuit was first rejected by a lower court and now is in the Court of Appeal, which means the decision that the Court of Appeal makes will actually have precedent. So it will determine like more clearly whether these signatures are indeed valid, which means that it could have a direct impact on the suit that the city is filing now against the LAFCO about the same issue.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, it seems to me that if there's any ambiguity about whether things are qualifying or not, like the best way to proceed with that would be to send it to the voters, ?
Yeah.
I see how that could be kind of a slippery slope, because like, okay, where's like what amount of ambiguity is okay?
Yeah. Like you don't want signature gatherers just like scrawling something out and then being like, oh, it means this.
But I think there are situations where like if the intent is very clear, like, okay, if you abbreviated street differently, but you wrote like the right address.
Yeah. That's what I was wondering. Couldn't you just call that person and say like, hey, did you mean to sign this? Was this you? And if they're like, no, then throw it out, right?
Right. And also, I'm curious, like, if LAFCO is able, I guess maybe we'll find out if they're really able to, depending on how the lawsuit pans out. But if they're able to just say, well, we're going to do it anyways, like, could they have just done that in the first place? I mean, like, actually, like, it seems like you guys are curious. Maybe we'll just do the study.
Yeah. I asked Keen Simons, the executive officer of LAFCO at our event. I was like, I asked him why they were promoting that social media post, right? That Instagram post about LAFCO moving the process forward for La Jolla, because it didn't sound like they were supportive of La Jolla separation, but they were like kind of into, talking about and advertising that they had moved it along, right?
Well, that's what I was kind of getting at during that conversation too, is like, I bet this is like so exciting for them. Right. This is like the whole reason that they exist. So like, obviously their interest would be like, yeah,
guys,
like,
it's our time.
Let's do the freaking study.
Guys, we've been waiting for this opportunity. This is our time to shine.
Right.
Yeah. Well, he didn't really go deep with me on that, but they do seem kind of into it. Now the mayor is suing them. The city is suing them. And I think, again, it's going to have this really interesting, ultimately, whether it's this suit or the other one, some pretty interesting implications about what an actual signature is. And if that ruling, by the way, goes forward and supports the Library and Parks Foundation, which I heard they did feel good about how the hearing went, that could be really interesting if that goes on the ballot. Again, a rather significant tax that would hit property owners. So that's where we're at with that. LAFCO versus the city.
All right. Well, we'll have to wait and see how that pans out.
We're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. I had a friend text me the other day, and he said, like, so is does the city not have enough money, or is it spending too much? And I was like, bro, that's like the deepest municipal
That's a big
philosophy
brain question. Yeah, it depends who you ask.
And you know what he was referring to, right? See, there's only a few things in city politics that that are guaranteed to penetrate to the normals, like the normal people out there.
Yeah.
And one of them is sports, the Padres, if they fought with the city or something, with the Chargers leaving. And another one is the fire rings. Every 10 years or whatever, the city decides like, oh, we got a budget deficit, so let's cut the $100,000 or whatever that we spend cleaning up these fire pits, and because those are a pain in the butt and we hate them. Right.
And wait, so this has happened before?
Yeah. So in 2008, we had a mayor, and remember, the mayor was a cop, like Jerry Sanders. He was the police chief, and he was, I don't know if it was 2008 or 2007, one of those years when it was bleak, right? It was recession time. The city was not doing well. There was a lot of talk of bankruptcy, and he's like, no, we're not bankrupt. But he says, we're going to cut the fire pits. And he was very clearly just hates the fire pits. And he very clearly hated the fire pits because he was a cop, and he felt like he always had to deal with bullshit at the fire pits, right? And so my daughter was incensed when she heard this. And I was like, she's like, what does it even cost? It's just a fire pit. And I said, well, they gotta take a tractor or whatever and dump the fire pit, clean it out. It's not nothing.
I didn't realize that the fire pits were movable. I guess that makes sense now, thinking that they're like on sand, that they're not like, somehow anchored into the ground. But the idea that they like move them around all the time was like something I just learned.
Yeah, so they have to clean. It mattered. But I think we had Tara Lawson-Remer in here, a few weeks ago, and she's like, look, you take those out, people are still going to have fires on the beach. It's just going to be all over the place. Mm-hmm. And that's not good, especially if you're walking barefoot to go surf or something, and there's a hot coal still underneath the sand.
Well, and that's already, I was in Oceanside this weekend for Mother's Day, and we decided we were going to grill up some kebabs, and we're looking for a fire pit. That did not manifest, but I was flying a kite so gleefully on the beach, and I did end up like tripping on like some abandoned fire pit. I mean, they have fire pits, but they're like really hard to get. Like you would have had to get there like first thing in the morning to have a fire pit for that evening. And so people already do that kind of thing, and I could just only imagine that if they were actually no pits.
Yeah.
What that would look like.
There's nothing, and we've talked about, there's nothing more San Diego than like going to the fire pit, than like hanging out. It's like, yeah, you got to reserve them. Sometimes you got to get there early or whatever, but like, it's a very just thing that you can do that doesn't cost a lot of money. That's nice. It's just a nice thing that we have. Mm-hmm. And so they tried to take them away, 15 years ago. There was such an outcry that the actual like San Diego Foundation got involved in like trying to save them and raising money from private donors to do it. But, similar thing. So the mayor decides to, and I remember when they told me about that they were going to do this, I was like, why are you doing that? Like, all it does, it's one of those things that like crystallizes more, in some ways more than like, even roads and parks sometimes. Like, just people get it. Like, oh, he's trying to cut that. And why would you do that? Just saves a little bit of money. And I think it's because they always want to get rid of it for other reasons, like cop reasons.
Well, and they like made that very clear during last week's city council hearing for the budget revised committee, and they were bringing up all of these like different line items, and they said, yeah, we're cutting the fire pits, and despite limited savings because this is supported by public safety.
Yeah.
And I guess they attract a lot of crime, and I can definitely see that. But also,
well, I don't know if they attract a lot of crime. I'm sorry, you have to.
Supposedly,
yeah, like you in general, things that people like, the cops get nervous about, right?
Well, yeah, I'm just like, no offense, but like, sorry, you have to do your job. Like, your job is to like fight crime so that people can like enjoy the city.
Yeah.
And there were people are, using these fire pits to enjoy the city, and sometimes things happen.
Yeah.
But that seems, I think, at least to the average San Diegan, seems like a worthy trade-off. But
yeah. Well, that's just one tiny cut. But again, couched in this larger budget deficit issue, you went to the mayor's update about, it's called the May Revise. So after a few months more of getting the numbers in about how things are going, the mayor gets better understanding, and his staff, the chief financial officer and such, they understand better what the money is doing, how much is coming in and how much is projected to come in. And they have to fix both the remaining budget gap from now to the end of the fiscal year till June, the end of June, and then, adjust for going forward for the next year for the budget that they have to pass before the end of June. You went to that. Was it exciting?
I don't know if that's the word that I would use. It was my first mayoral press conference. I had never been in that room before, in person at least.
The 13th floor, or in the mayor's office?
In the mayor's office.
With the big conference room?
Yeah. And there was just a bunch of cameras in there. I'm
Yeah.
I was reminded how little media there is in the city. I'm like, I know all these people.
I know.
But it was very interesting in the sense that if you look at the budget revise, there wasn't really even much of a revise. That's the story here. There was some minor cuts to, I say minor, subjective. There were some cuts to public safety that were restored. And there was also, they partly restored the contract with the San Diego Humane Society.
So with the public safety cut, it wasn't that they cut, the police department's still getting more money.
That's the thing. Yeah, I was going to get into that, but let's get into that.
Yeah.
So I've found this confusing because I see, the budget comes out, the initial draft comes out, and San Diego Police Department and the Fire Department are pretty much the only two departments that got an increase in their annual budgets. And we're talking significant. The San Diego Police Department increase was something like $29 million.
Yeah.
While everything else is getting cut. And this is not unusual. The police budget does not decrease. That's just not something that really happens.
And everybody should know, the bulk of city budget stuff, you can talk about libraries and whatever, it's police and fire. And then it's a bunch of other things in the little pie next to those two big things.
Right. And so that's coming out. But then I keep seeing these headlines from the Union Tribune talking about police cuts and communities showing up and arguing against police cuts. And I'm like, what are we talking about?
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand how a $30 million increase is a cut. Help me understand that. And so the specific is that, one, there's a 4 to 5% increase in officer pay. Nobody's getting pay cuts kind of across the board. And most of that $30 million increase is being absorbed by those pay cuts. But then on top of that, there's these there was $7 million in the draft of operational cuts, including the Northwestern Division was going to be closed.
Mm-hmm.
And some other things. They were cutting detective positions, some very specific line items that they were arguing against. And some of that is being restored now. So some of the cuts are being restored, but they also are still overall having an increase, but it's not an increase that I guess keeps up with inflation. And so it's just interesting because witnessing the spin, you're getting these emails saying oh, we're going to invest more in public safety. And then next email is we're restoring the public safety cuts. I'm
yeah, what are we doing? Yeah.
What are we doing exactly? But it does make me curious, how this is manifesting for other departments, because, there are employees across the city who are getting pay raises because inflation, and that is a reasonable thing. And, if this pay increase is pretty much completely just covering that inflation, are other departments getting increases that are, covering the inflation of that personnel costs?
Well, that's the big question. I think a lot of the labor deals are actually being renegotiated this year. And so I think that's part of what was fueling a lot of the discussion right now. They have a $258 million budget deficit this year. And so if they go into negotiations next year and, give another big raise or something, we're going to be right back here in this painful discussion about what's going to get cut or not. And the fire pits will be right back there. And not that they won't get cut now, I don't know. But there's that's all going on. So they went through that. Yeah, the mayor also said he wants to cut funding to a homeless shelter in the Midway area, right? So $5 million he's cut from the budget This is a joint, it's a tent that was put up by the county, and it's run by the Alpha Project, and the Lucky Duck Foundation actually bought the tent and put it there, and the city has been paying for its operations, and the county has the land and has been paying for the utilities. And then the mayor's like, look, we're done. We have too big of a problem. The county needs to step up and do it. And at the same time, it's right there next to that. If you know the area by Rosecrans where that big county building is, by Big Five Sports, that's where there's a big county behavioral health center.
Is this like kind of adjacent to like the Old Town transit station?
Yeah. So they want to demolish that, and thus it's connected or right there next to this tent. And if they demolish the building, they're afraid that it won't be safe for the people to be there, and the utilities aren't going to be connected or whatever. So the county wants to go forward with that demolition. The city's like, whoa, you need to take care of this shelter. And so there's this standoff building. Lisa Halberstadt wrote about it, and it's, as she always does, she does a good job of talking to the people actually being affected by that. They're starting to let beds go empty because they don't want to have to disrupt people once they close the shelter. Mm-hmm. But that just sucks every time you have like 10 beds just sitting there, seeing everybody on the street. You're like, what are we doing?
Well, yeah, and you see, like Lisa had included in the story, that like 9 in 10 shelter inquiries are still denied because like they don't have beds for them, and then you have these beds sitting here empty, and all of these other beds filled with people who soon will not be able to access those beds potentially.
Right, and the operators, Alpha Project CEO Bob McElroy was very clearly frustrated. He said to have the rug pulled out from them under them like this, it sends shockwaves through Alpha and our staff. But residents, most importantly, I just can't believe it. I just think it's outright despicable. And I would ask the mayor, if he's the prime mover of this, to come down, look our people in the eye, and tell them why this is happening. And the county is firing back. We got Jim Desmond talking about how bad the city's finances are. They mismanage their finances. It's their fault. We got Richard Bailey. I actually pull a clip from this on his Instagram. He's the mayor of Coronado, just blasting the city for closing its fire rings and all this stuff. Everybody's just hammering the city right now. But at the heart of it is these, dozens and dozens of people who are in danger of going back on the street.
And what this has basically become, if it is not clear from what you described, is a continuation of this tension between basically like Todd Gloria versus every other mayor or, every other government entity, saying that, because when Lisa asked him about this yesterday at the press conference, the response is the response that we had heard before, saying, I'm doing so much, like the county needs to step up and help pay for this, and all the other mayors need to step up and pay for this. And I just don't think that answer is going to be satisfying for those people who are going to potentially end up on the streets. See, there's been talk that, they're going to be relocated to other shelters, and I'm sure that effort is going to be underway. But, all of this is just so fluid and uncertain, and the space is just so sparse that, like, very reasonably, these people don't feel like their future in shelter is certain.
Yeah, and I think it's like, okay, I get like wanting to own each other, right? Like Richard Bailey's having a great time owning the mayor on closing the beach rings, and Jim Desmond's owning the mayor on doing this, and the mayor's owning them both for not, taking care of their own homeless crisis. And it's like, guys, that's cute and I appreciate it, but maybe instead of owning each other, like get down, sit down, and figure out how you can take care of people. Like I think underneath every discussion about the homelessness is that there's enough spots for them, supposedly, that like they should be going to those spots. There are not. And everyone agrees there should be a safe place for people to go. And, I think there's some disagreement about how forcefully they should be forced there, right? But if we all agree there should be some place for people to go, then get it done. Mm-hmm. and make places for them to go, and this finger pointing is good for our content, I guess, but it's
well, and I do think it's a fair criticism that like that obviously applies to every city.
Yeah,
everybody needs to get it done and maybe stop focusing so much on what everybody else is doing and just get it done.
Yeah.
But no, this does not just apply to Todd Gloria.
Well, so related, Tigges Lane did a story about a family in Escondido. You read this.
Mm-hmm.
It was a good piece about a family that was homeless and barely getting by, got into a shelter and got into an apartment. And I thought the lead was just excellent. It's just like they moved into this apartment, but they stayed in the main room the first few nights because they were just so used to being huddled together in one room. What a great and powerful image to because you can sense that if you go through something like that, you're not going to just immediately spread out and go to your rooms and such. It was a great piece by Tigges Lane. I encourage you to check it out.
Absolutely.
Well, so what else did they come out with? And this budget deficit is $258 million. That's how much they're projected, spending that much more than they're projected to bring in. So they have to make a lot of cuts. Was there any relief for some of the things that people are worried about with parks and libraries, bathrooms?
No. Basically, none of the funding, the cuts that are proposed for libraries, parks, restrooms, recreation center was restored, despite there was a lot of discussion in the city council. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion from residents. Yeah, I've been seeing it on social media. They're coming to the meetings. People are extremely upset about this. But even in the city council, it was so interesting because there was this conversation where many of the council members have repeatedly said, we don't want to see across the board cuts. We want these cuts to be targeted and equitable, basically saying that right now, the idea is that they're just all the libraries are going to be closed at the same times and have the same cuts. But council members want to see maybe more services retained in low income communities and less in these higher resource communities. And even council member Jolla, who represents La Jolla and other, these higher income communities, was explicitly saying, I think that we could sustain deeper cuts because we could probably find philanthropic support to make up for it while other communities couldn't. He was down. And still Todd Gloria, went out in the press conference the other day and said we're not going to do that. It's too confusing and just basically too difficult to implement. But I think that was a really interesting point of tension where it seemed kind of a lot of people were on the same page about it and he was not down. But also this is ultimately at this point going to come down to the city council. So maybe this could all change. Mm-hmm. It'll be up to them to decide in the next month or so.
Well, that's what's interesting. This whole experience since the strong mayor form of government was in place it has been a demonstration in just how much power the mayor does have, though. I've seen it now a couple times where the mayor will propose a budget, the city council will tweak it here and there, and the mayor will just say no. And they have to get a super majority. And even then, he has this almost line item power to implement a budget because of the strong mayor form of government and just what he's allowed to do. We've seen it a few times. So I'll be really interested to see if they do have a showdown at the end.
Yeah, so you're saying that the city council could be actually screw that. We're going to restore these things, and Mayor Todd Gloria could come in at the last minute and be actually no, even though I'm not really supposed to be involved in this process anymore.
Yeah, he can veto it and not only veto, but line item veto it, scratch out a different thing, and they'd have to overcome it now with 2/3, six or seven votes. But I remember a dispute with Kevin Faulkner where he was able to pull it off even with that, but that might have been with the fewer council members. But it's a real power he has in this process for sure. I think just stepping back, I just wish somebody would articulate a vision of how we could have a city that's not terrible, just lay out okay, here's how we could have quality parks and libraries and roads, and here's how we could keep the beach rings and keep everybody safe. And here's what that would cost. Here's the kind of efficiencies we could find to get there. Here's the kind of money we would need to invest, and just lay out a vision. Because right now the mayor's just in this sort of tough guy, I'm going to make the cuts. I'm going to just put my chin up, even if you come at me for them.
Right.
And that is an admirable, I guess, sort of stoic way to go about it in a way. But it's not inspiring. You know, it's not like making me want to like pitch in and make the city a better place. And I said it years and years, just need somebody to make that, to pull us along to a better place, because it feels bleak.
It seems like a conversation that would have paired really well with the sales tax that was proposed.
Imagine that.
I don't know. Like maybe we could have all just sat around and like envisioned a better world where we, pay more taxes and we fund the things that we actually care about.
Isn't it even more stark of a scandal than it was that they did nothing to illustrate that this is the kind of stuff that they would do if that tax didn't pass? They can act now like, oh, that was implied. It wasn't implied. Every single opportunity they had to discuss what was at stake or whether this sort of thing would happen, if that happened, they kicked that off and said, no, we're, this is only about investing in infrastructure and, stormwater, things that we want to do in the future. It's not about just balancing the budget. And then it doesn't pass and they're like, oh, well, now we got to chop your heads off. It's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. I mean, hindsight's 2020, but like this was an election that like we can see now was determined on economic grounds, no less. Like people were voting with their wallets and it was not looking good for them. And so to think that people would have just like understood that like the sales tax was a good thing while they were like clearly voting with this like conservative mindset financially, just like obviously that wasn't going to work out.
Even if you just said the fire rings, like if you just said like, hey, this tax needs to be, if you care about this sort of thing in the city, they could have got a few thousand votes on that.
Right.
And then they only needed like 3,000 or 4,000. I mean, it's absurd to me that they can with a straight face say like, well, that wasn't a winning strategy. Well, you lost, first of all. But second of all, like, I don't care if it's win. You should just be honest, like, of your plans and the stark reality of the situation you're in. There's a border between being honest and being like, disappointed. You can still be like inspiring, be like, hey, this is the situation we're in. We need to like all pitch in and get something done.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just so uninspiring. And now, they just basically deceived everybody for a year. And now they're like, this is tough, huh?
Yeah. Well, maybe this will bode well for the libraries and parks parcel tax that may or may not end up on the ballot in the near future.
Thanks for listening to the Voice of San Diego podcast, the most popular public affairs podcast recorded on the disputed border between Cortez Hill and Greater Little Italy in downtown San Diego. We are the most popular public affairs podcast recorded on the disputed sort of demilitarized zone between Cortez Hill and Greater Little Italy. We sit in anticipation of how that border dispute will be dealt with. Andrea Lopez Villafana is our managing editor. Jacob McQueen is our education reporter and the composer of our theme music. Bella Ross is our social media producer, and Xavier Vasquez is the producer of this show. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.